So next on Google Hangout, we have Sara Hendren.
So I'm Sara Hendren, it's great to be here. I am an artist. I teach at an engineering school called Olin College. It's the screenshot that you're seeing right now. And I just pulled together these slides, partly in response to what I've heard just now, because I want people to know about Olin. It's a tiny little engineering school. All students get engineering degrees, mechanical, electrical, computer, et cetera, software, hardware. And we are by policy pretty much 50-50 men and women. We have a long way to go in terms of race and class, but Olin was started 12 years ago. In part to fix essentially a broken discipline of engineering because of the vast imbalance between men and women. So nationwide, the major of engineering is 80% men and 20% women, and so we're trying to reinvent the way it's done on a lot of fronts. So I'd love to talk more about that sometime. But I'm here because my research area is in technology and ability and disability. So I'll talk not about software in particular, because I'm not a coder or programmer, I'm not an engineer, again, I'm an artist and designer, but I want to talk about a general disposition toward ability and disability that I try to embody in my own work and the work that I do with students. And that disposition is a kind of productive uncertainty in engineering and design. So whether we're talking about hardware or software, a kind of productive uncertainty around ability and technology. So I'll say more about what that is and why would that be important around ability? Well, contemporary media in US culture and in lots of places in the world are pretty populated with images of prosthetic technologies and assistive devices that restore functionality to human bodies by the use of replacement parts and so on. And many of these technologies are fantastic and they're very welcome, right? And as a result, like not a week goes by that someone doesn't email or tweet at me something about the amazing new high-end prosthetic runner's legs, for example, or apps for people who are blind. And again, these things are great. The problem is that these stories have an overwhelmingly monolithic narrative, and it's the one that you're looking at right now, like this kind of breathless headline about technology. And so it's like, dude, like DARPA's crazy mind-controlled prosthetics have gotten even better. So my experience as a person who is a relative of and family member of and friend to and ally of people with atypical bodies and minds of all kinds, I understood that this media story is really actually in sharp contrast to the wildly variable experience of people in their bodies and in their heads, right? And so I want to encourage young engineers and designers to think about these complexities. And I'll give you, a kind of example. So there are these really interesting technologies that you think of, right? That are like the myoelectric hand that has 14 grip patterns and is $90,000 and really quite impressive. And again, I think this is great. And there's a story here about returning this person's normativity in the form of his wedding ring and so on. But things get a lot more complicated. This is the kind of thing you'll see all over the newspapers. But take, for instance, deafness. This is an image of a cochlear implant. Probably some of you are familiar. A tremendous amount of R&D funds have gone to creating cochlear implants, which grant back some hearing to people who are born deaf. And so this is an entire line of engineering that's geared toward therapeutically treating deafness as a kind of non-normative state. But the fact is that if you go to Gallaudet University, which is an all-deaf campus, you'll find design attention to things like this, which is called deaf space. So it's like an architecture precisely geared around accommodating deafness as a form of communication. So the sight lines are really long because the language is visual, after all. And these kind of things are forking paths, right? That there is a kind of therapeutic logic to this kind of technology, and there's a kind of accommodating and honoring difference that goes into this kind of architectural scale systems design. And so it's possible, of course, to affirm both of those things, but at some level they are in confrontation with one another, with what counts as normal and what's acceptable in the human body. Autism is another example, very highly contested and hotly debated, whether autism is a a true disorder, as it's often called, or whether it's a form of neurodiversity in the way that nature honors biodiversity. So here, for instance, you'll see, again, lots of R&D, engineering, research dollars going toward the development of social robots for use with children in a therapeutic context. So the robots are thought to be a kind of non-threatening, sort of low threshold and remediative way to teach young people about things like facial recognition and expression and emotion and so on. And so again, you'll see lots of university-based use of social robots in this way. But there's also been, in the last 10 years, a really interesting development out of Denmark. A father who has a son who identifies as autistic started an IT firm that's staffed entirely with consultants who identify also on the autism spectrum. And rather than thinking of this as a charity or a sort of special case, he built with a kind of bottom line logic a staff of IT consultants based on their cognitive strengths, not on their differences. And so they alert their clients to the fact that their relationship to their consultant may be slightly different than the one that they're used to, but they promise to deliver, because it turns out that there's, in the cognitive profile of people who identify as autistic, there's quite a lot of really strong gifts in terms of the detail and the kind of linear focus that IT requires. And so here again, it's a kind of, really big distinction between turning our attention to and developing devices and products that that therapeutically treat what have come to be medicalized as differences versus, again, systems design and kind of institutional engineering that, that honors difference and in fact, promotes it. So these are just two of many, many examples, and the complexities are at the heart of research and advocacy that's in what's called disability studies, right? And disability studies isn't really a field so much as it is a point of view across disciplines. But there's a conviction in general shared politically by people in the field that sometimes, right, sometimes people with atypical bodies and minds are asking for technologies and devices that help them gain a kind of culturally defined normativity back. Sometimes that is the case, so great. But sometimes people with atypicalities are asking for a more accommodating world, and that is, I think, the more ambitious challenge to, I think, the crowd who's there today. That means systems and tools and buildings and economies even that honor a difference, and technologies to help us actually ask those questions, right, to be provocative in the product space and in the system space, precisely about what counts as normal, what counts as able, who's independent and dependent, and so on. And so, very practically speaking, what can young programmers and engineers do in the face of these kinds of forking paths? And I think the biggest thing is to ask people themselves what it is that they want. I mean, even in the kind of human-centered design era, it's still pretty rare that you'll have people with atypical bodies and minds involved way up in the stream of research and development for technologies that are intended for them. And so there's far too little of that. And I think, honestly, I think there's too little involvement of people with disabilities in their own technologies because well-meaning, able-bodied folks are nervous about doing it wrong. I mean, I think using the wrong words or a general awkwardness around what to do or say, and I've seen this a bunch as someone who, again, is an able-bodied but family member of people with atypical bodies and minds. I've seen a lot of that awkwardness. And I can tell you that that fear is often unfounded. There really are rich partnerships to be created if you seek out self-advocates and listen well and ask questions and spend time doing the research. And I think what animates me and this kind of, this sort of broad notion of access and accessibility, with disability, it tends to be a kind of bleeding heart issue with a lot of like soft piano music in the background. And I think that's not necessary. I think it hurts, sort of people, atypical people being part of the conversation. I encourage young designers and engineers to just be interested in human bodies and capacities, full stop, without a lot of preconceived notions about brokenness and wholeness and good things will result. I do want to just give one shout out to a shining beacon of an example, and that's DIYability.org in New York. They're a partnership between an occupational therapist named Holly Cohen and a programmer named John Schimmel, and they work one-on-one with young people with disabilities of all kinds to figure out what it is that they want to build, and then they also they help those young people build it for themselves. So they also scaffold precisely the kind of design and engineering so that people can be building things for themselves, and it's pretty radical and pretty rare still, so I hope you'll look them up. So again, I just want to say that the need for better tools and software and design is very real, but we also need productive uncertainty about who's asking for which kind of assistance, who's not, and who the designer or programmer is in that process. So thanks for including me.